It is good to be here. I did regret not being here last week. I have really enjoyed the Bible study in Genesis, and the story of Joseph has always been my favorite Bible story. So getting that opportunity to dig into Joseph a little deeper has been very eye-opening for me. I've spent a lot of time looking at different Bible commentaries and just see what other people think, how this all played out in the story of Joseph and in those times. And it's, I've looked at it with a little different perspective than, say, maybe, a 10-year-old child in Sunday school, hearing the story of the coat of many colors and those mean brothers and all those things. So I have really enjoyed just the last couple weeks of pouring through Genesis and learning more about this story, just for me personally. So good to be back tonight. Thank you, Stephen, for filling in, using your Bible scholar talents. It's funny because he was talking about all the texts and the emails and the encouragement and stuff. And when I text Stephen, it's usually the opposite. Because I believe that a brother-in-law's job is to keep his brother-in-law grounded. So typically my texts to Stephen are not typically very encouraging. So I just wanted to be upfront and honest about that. I was not in that list of people he was talking about this morning. So if you have remembered, we are getting ready to start Genesis chapter 40. So if you want to get turned there in your Bible, and we're getting ready to hit the crescendo of the story of Joseph, in my opinion. Right, things are building, and one of the things I found really interesting is I went back through, even back through Isaac, and all of the different things that have happened through this family. There's been a lot of sin. There's been a lot of things that we look at and we're like, wow, that's terrible. How could they do that? Lying, deceit, all these different things. And then God would speak to these people because, they're men just like us. They have that ability to sin. But then as I look at Joseph, there's not really any acknowledgement of any of Joseph's sins. Right? And I'm not going to say Joseph was perfect because we know no man was ever perfect until Jesus Christ came to earth. But, a really great example for us on how to live your life. And yet, God never spoke to Joseph anywhere that we see in any of this. But there's the continual theme throughout all of this as new and egregious adventures occur to him. God was with him. Right, throughout the entire story, it always goes back to, a new awful thing has happened to Joseph, but God was with him, and whether it was in the time that he was thrown in a pit and sold as a slave, and as we would review last week in chapter 39 with his time at Potiphar's house, and the Lord was blessing this house, and then his wife made the accusation. And that gets us to where we are today. But, just important to remember that throughout all of this, God was with him. I'll get myself ready here in a second, I promise. All right, so I said turn to Genesis chapter 40, but we are going to back up just a few verses into Genesis 39 to set our context. So we're going to start Genesis 39 and verse 20. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So, obviously Joseph's been accused, and we know falsely accused, of making advances on Potiphar's wife. And so Potiphar does what Potiphar had to do. He disciplined him. He threw him into prison. Just a few things. If you think about what was Potiphar's job, what did Potiphar do? Potiphar was a very, very important man. He was the captain of the guard for the king of Egypt. All right, so when he threw him into prison, I think he threw him into prison, and this is Mike Graver thinking this, that he threw him into prison to save face. His wife made the accusation. He didn't really believe that Joseph did the things that she accused him of, but he didn't want to accuse his wife of lying. My wife's laughing at me right now. Didn't want to accuse his wife of lying, and so he threw him into prison. But do you know what the captain of the guard had the ability to do? He threw him in the 5-star Hilton prison, all right? He threw him in the prison where the king's prisoners went, all right? He also put him in a place where I am sure that he told the prison keeper that Joseph was a good man, and I'm sure Joseph got these opportunities to help lead this prison very, very early on. So again, he's thrown into prison, and I'm not saying that that's a good thing. But as I've thought more and more about this, and again read many commentaries on how all of this plays out, he was put into a position that obviously was being led of God. This is where he needed to be. This is where God wanted him. This is preparing Joseph for the greater things, preparing Joseph to fulfill the prophecy of the dreams that he had as a young man, as a young boy. So we see here coming into Genesis 40, the table is set. He's in the prison. He is basically running the prison, and the prison is prospering. So in Genesis 40 and verse 1, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers, what that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place. And thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Sorry. When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler into his butlership again, And he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. That's awful. Abby, can you get me some water? I should have had some up here. Thank you. All right, so we see here that we have two men who were important in Pharaoh's court. The butler and the baker. Two men, thank you. Two men who had, very important jobs, who did very intimate work for the king of Egypt. And, as we talk about them being thrown into prison, we'll look at what some of the opportunities were that maybe why they were in prison. But before we break this down, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Our Lord and Father, we are thankful for this evening, Lord. We just pray that you will bless this gathering of your believers, Lord. Just it's good to be here with friends and family on a Sunday evening. We pray that you will empty me of me, Lord. Let your words flow. I just pray that the attentive ears will be here to hear it, Lord, and that we will glean from your word what we need to hear. We just pray now, Lord, once again throughout this service that you will protect us. Bless our business meeting afterward, Lord, and just bless everyone and give them safe traveling home. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we have two members of the royal court who are put into prison. All right, and in Genesis 1, it says it came to pass, or Genesis 41, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. So the butler, in a lot of the things I was reading, was referred to as the cupbearer. All right, he was the one that would hand the Pharaoh his cup, his wine, his water, whatever those things are. Not in the same traditional sense of the British butler, the butlers from Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey's a great TV show if you've never watched it. He had this role. And if you think about, the role of the person that is handing the king of Egypt whatever he's going to drink, that's a pretty important role. The other was the baker. Baker, very simply, in charge of everything that the Pharaoh ate. All right? So again, a very intimate role in the life of a Pharaoh. Preparing meals, preparing the drinks, handing them to him. So, as you go through, why were these two guys in jail? What did they do to offend the Pharaoh? Well, the best speculation is that there was probably a plot on the king of Egypt's life and that they were going to poison him. Somebody was plotting to poison him. If you're going to poison the king of Egypt, how do you got to get that poison to him? Through the butler or through the baker. And so the offense, it does appear that has happened here, is that Pharaoh is probably angry because he's found out that somebody is trying to kill him, all right, and do it through poisoning. So we have Joseph here in prison. He's prospering, as he has done in every step of his life, right? He is prospering. He's in charge of the prison. How do you get thrown in prison and you become in charge of the prison? So he's here, and now these two gentlemen have been presented to him. It says that Pharaoh was wroth against the two officers, the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers, and he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard. Now, who's the captain of the guard? Potiphar. All right, so he put him in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. So, if I'm reading this correctly, Potiphar personally put the butler and the baker in the charge of Joseph, which again goes to, me saying that the only reason Joseph is here is because Potiphar just tried to save face. He just did what he thought he had to do to keep his authority, to keep his prominence in Egypt. All right, so with these two gentlemen being placed here under suspicion of murder, they are put in, and it says very specifically that Joseph served them. So they were put in Joseph's service. So Joseph had this high position of high authority, right? He was literally the prisoner running the prison. And he could have taken advantage of that, right? He could have done whatever he wanted to do, right? But he didn't use it to make others serve him. It literally says in verse 4 that he served the butler and the baker, right? So he used his high position to serve others. In my personal Bible study, I like to look at things. I use the YouVersion app a lot on my phone, and I like to look at things around leadership because I have a lot of opportunities in my life in leadership roles, and I want to, apply godly leadership to the things that I do. And so currently going through a Bible study on leadership, and, I think the best way to lead is to do it as a servant. So if you want to turn over to Luke 22 real quick, because there are many examples of in Jesus' ministry and his time on earth of what servant leadership looks like. And in Luke chapter 22, and verse 24, all right, we find Jesus here. He's watching the scribes, the Pharisees. They're all jockeying for position, right? They're all looking for this opportunity to be the best of them. And Jesus is there in this situation, and in verse 24, and there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. And he said unto them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. But ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. And so we see Joseph here, many, many years before Jesus' time on earth, showing that example of being a servant, right? Leading through his service. And so Joseph had this opportunity, and he chose to use it just to serve them. He probably had a lot of options, a lot of different things that he could have done in his time with these two men, but he was being a servant to them. And then we get into verse 5. I'm sorry. One other thing. It talks about they continued a season in ward. And I tried to figure out what a season was. And, one definition was an indefinite amount of time. One was several days, probably up to a year. So they had been there for some amount of time. That indefinite amount of time, I'm going to say, was probably more like a year. And a lot of the commentary that I was looking at, most people agree that Joseph was probably in the prison about 12 years. I don't know that I have an opinion on how long that was, but so somewhere in this time, they were imprisoned. It was a decent length of time. We can tell you it wasn't a couple days, it wasn't a week. It was much longer than that. All right, but in that time, we get to verse 5, and they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream. The butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, wherefore look ye so sadly today? All right, they're in prison. If I'm in prison, I'm looking sad every day, right? It's prison, But this one day in particular, Joseph looks at them and says, why so glum, chum? He recognized that there was something different, and that was because of his heart and his servant leadership, right? He noticed that there was just something must have happened. And so he asked them. He didn't have to ask them that. He could have just walked right on by. But he asked them, what's going on? Why do you look so sadly today? I just think, again, it goes to the fact that, Joseph, while in prison here, is not consumed by bitterness. He's not angry. He is serving the Lord, and the Lord is with him through all of this process. And he could have thought, everything keeps going against me and all this thing. And again, he could have used that in the way that he looked at these two men. But he didn't. He cared. All right? He cared so much that he asked them why they looked so sad. All right? So, through this, Joseph actually shows us a lot of Jesus in this process here, right? There are a lot of parallels there. Jesus was wrongly accused. Jesus was wrongly imprisoned. Jesus went through everything that he went through at the end, without bitterness, with absolute love and compassion for the people there directly imprisoning him, and doing those things to him, and even all of us today, right? Joseph never looked for pity. He never looked for, anyone to. He wasn't expecting anyone to ask him why he looked sad, right? And I'm sure that that's because he didn't look sad. But he asked, just as Jesus would ask us, why do you look sad today? He asked these men, why do you look sad? Think about that as you think of a person who, has Jesus in your heart. Do you care about others to that level where you see something that's going on? You can tell there's something different in their countenance that you ask them, or do you just go right on by? Kind of like that thought went and came and went. That's how it works, right, Stephen? Analogy there, analogies over there. All right, so we'll move on. The point is here, right? Joseph cared enough to ask. And in Genesis 40 and verse 8, and they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? You're not going to find an interpreter here on earth. Interpretations of dreams belong to God, so tell me. Tell me what they are. Tell me them, I pray you. Tell me them, please. All right? This wasn't because Joseph wanted the tea, right? He wasn't looking for, yeah, I know. He wasn't being nosy, right? He wasn't doing it just to say, let's get some good gossip going here, all right? He genuinely cared. It wasn't just so he could discuss their dreams. Have you ever had a weird dream, by the way? Yeah, you wake up and you've had a weird dream. All right, Joseph wasn't looking to be a fortune teller. All right. Joseph saw that these two men were clearly disturbed by their dreams. All right. And he just wanted that opportunity to be the vessel for God to touch their troubled souls. All right. That's the opportunity he was looking for. And he points out again that the interpretations belong to God. All right. Joseph had some experience with dreams. All right. Fortunately, dreams are what started the road, the path to where he is now. He had a couple of dreams that basically showed his future greatness, right? And he had a bunch of brothers, and they didn't like it. All right, they weren't sending him text messages of encouragement either. And so those dreams antagonized his family. That wasn't what Joseph was going for with those dreams, but that's the result that it got. And it led to him being mocked as the dreamer, right? They called him the dreamer. I have nicknames for Stephen too. So he has experience with dreams, obviously, right? So he went into this with the confidence that God knew what those dreams were about. And that if these men told him, all right, that he would be able to help them. Because he knew that his Father knows everything. All right? And, I think it's important to remember that God certainly speaks, can speak to us through dreams. He has many, many times, many examples in the Bible, spoke through dreams. So obviously, if God is speaking to someone through the dreams, he knows the interpretation of it, right? So Joseph had that confidence. But, just looking at all the different experiences that people have had through dreams. In Genesis chapter 20, the king Abimelech, God spoke to him in a dream. All right? God spoke to Jacob in dreams in Genesis 28 and Genesis 31. Sorry. I do feel better, but I still have a lingering cough, and the throat does get dry. God spoke to Laban in a dream in Genesis 31. He spoke to the Midianite in a dream in Judges. He spoke to Solomon in a dream in 1 Kings. He spoke to Nebuchadnezzar in a dream in Daniel 2. He spoke to Daniel in a dream in Daniel 7. He spoke to Joseph in Matthew, chapter 1, chapter 2, telling him about the fact that, he was going to take Mary to be his wife, and, they were going to raise the king of Israel. All right? He spoke to Pilate's wife in a dream in Matthew 27. So we have all of these examples of where God has spoken to people in dreams. So this is a very real way for God to communicate. All right? We also see that God spoke to unbelievers in dreams about twice as many times as he spoke to his people in dreams. So I think, I mentioned earlier, we've had weird dreams, or you wake up and you remember a dream. I think a lot of times what impacts your dreams is what you're going to bed with, right? If you're up watching TV, your dreams may be about that. If you go to sleep reading the Bible, it might be more likely that you're going to have the dream where God is speaking to you. All right? But it is important to remember that not every dream is a revelation from God, right? Dreams, it can just be because your mind is busy, all right? We obviously have a dream rotation in our sleep every night, and we don't always remember the things that we dream about. I don't know, it wasn't that long ago I had a dream that apparently Angie said I was I don't know, whining or moaning, or I don't know. I do remember the dream vividly. It was weird, and I felt I was scared in the dream. Makes it a nightmare, right? Yeah. All right. So, it is important to remember, again, not every dream is a revelation, that false prophets can use dreams to give weight to their message, and we see examples of this in Deuteronomy and Jeremiah. But we do need to make sure that we still keep our mind and our heart open to the way that God might speak. But again, if your mind and your heart are open to God and you're doing the right things, that's going to make it much more likely that He is reaching out to you. So back to the dreams here. All right. In verse 9, the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine there were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand." All right. So, God uses, when He does these dreams, He puts them into things that are pertinent, that the dreamer will understand. So we're talking about the cupbearer here, right? The butler, right? So grapevines and pressing grapes and making wine and doing those things, that's all, very, very familiar to this butler. And he saw himself there making wine for Pharaoh again in this dream. And in verse 12, Joseph interprets it. And Joseph said unto him, "This is the interpretation of it." He doesn't say, "This is my interpretation of it." He doesn't say, "I think this is what it says, what it's saying to you." He says, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place. And thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner, when thou wast his butler. Good news for the butler, right? Pharaoh's going to lift up your head, and you're going to be restored into your place in his house. You're going to be giving him his drinks again, all right? But Joseph goes on in verse 14, but think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. So, we see here Joseph, he takes God's interpretation of the dream and he explains it to him. All right? And, this is pretty bold. This is going to happen in 3 days. This isn't like, a soothsayer looking into the crystal ball saying, oh, I see, great fortune coming to you someday, maybe. He says in 3 days this is going to happen. All right, so this is a pretty bold statement. There's no way that Joseph was guessing that 3 branches meant 3 days. This was all definitely an interpretation of the dream coming from God, and he was confident in that and very bold in that. So now he's on the clock. In 3 days, we're going to find out, is Joseph a phony or is he on the level? All right, but after he gave this information to him, he did give him a request. All right. He asked for the butler to see what he could do for him when he gets back into Pharaoh's court, right? And, he was showing his godly character in this Egyptian prison. He was not angry. He was not bitter. But he wasn't stupid either. He didn't want to be in prison. Do you blame him? He didn't want to be in prison. He wanted to get out, and he saw this as an opportunity of an appropriate way to facilitate his exit from the prison. All right? He wasn't fatalistic, right? He used his wisdom and his common sense through this process. Even though God was with him in the prison, he was still in prison. Just because God, you can see God in your present circumstances, that doesn't mean that that's the circumstances that you should always be in or that you're always going to be in. It's going through those seasons, which are an indefinite amount of time, anywhere from a few days to a year, maybe more. All right. So, the butler gets good news. Now the baker says, well, hey, I want to know what my dream's about. Right? So now the baker he's all excited. He might even have a smile on his face at this point. Tell me my dream, Joseph. And in verse 16, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream. This has got to be good news. I was in my dream. And behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is baked meats. Baked meats sound pretty good. I kind of think it's like my wife's meatloaf, because she puts some bread in there, and and you mix it all up and make meat. That's baked meat, right? All right, sorry. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation thereof. This is in verse 18. The 3 baskets, again, are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee. Let's go back up here to what he said to the butler. All right. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee. He looks at the butler and he says, in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift up thy head off thee. It doesn't sound good, does it? Doesn't sound good at all. All right. And shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. All right. Baker doesn't get good news, all right? He was so encouraged, he was so excited after he heard what the butler's interpretation was, and obviously was hoping for the same. But the important thing here is that Joseph was just as faithful to deliver the message of judgment to the baker as he was to give the good news. Anybody like to give bad news? I hate giving bad news. I don't like confrontation. You know, I get in situations at work and you have to deal with things, and it's just not the thing that I enjoy doing. All right? But do I give those messages? Yes, I do. I have to. I have to be faithful to that. I have to do it in the right way, in the right manner. So, you know, here's Joseph being just as faithful to deliver, and he was pretty blunt. Pharaoh's going to lift thy head up off thee, and he's going to hang you from a tree, and the birds are going to eat you. You know, that's yeah, I don't know. So, you know, people who are willing to give both of those sermons, right? That's very, very important. And so, when we talk about the birds eating his flesh, this was also a very disgraceful thing for people to experience, right? Now I'm dropping stuff all over the place. You know, but Joseph understood that, you know, the fate of both of these men was what was just. You know, again, the crimes of them probably both being expected, or, you know, suspected of trying to poison or plotting to poison the Pharaoh. Sounds like the baker's probably guilty. I'd say that's fair, and that the butler did not have anything to do with it. But again, now we're on the clock. 3 days. 3 days, we're going to find out if Joseph is on the level. And so we get to there in verse 20, and it came to pass the third day, which, by the way, was Pharaoh's birthday. Yeah, good birthday hanging and bird feeding party. All right. So it's Pharaoh's birthday. He made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, just as Joseph said that it was going to happen. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. So went on the 3-day clock, and it is proven that Joseph was truly given the interpretation from God. So, you know, we kind of, you know, a lot of times, you know, as a child, you look at these great Bible stories, and you look at Joseph, and you're like, oh, you know, I want to be Joseph in that story. But again, you know, the parallel of Joseph is more towards Jesus. We're the butler and the baker. You know, I think, you know, you look at, again, Joseph, innocent man, put in prison. Jesus was falsely accused. He was obviously the most innocent man ever. You know, through this, that innocent prisoner revealed God's message to us. You know, Jesus was also proven true in 3 days with his resurrection. You know, Joseph shows us Jesus, right? That message that God brings life or death. You know, the difference is, while Joseph gave bad news to the guilty person, Jesus has got good news for everybody. Whether you're innocent or guilty, Jesus has good news. We can all turn away from our sins and be forgiven through his blood. All right? And then in verse 23, the really bad news here. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. So Joseph made that plea, remember me. You know, remember that I'm here wrongly. But, you know, as we go through again, this is just the next step in what we know is going to happen here for Joseph and for everyone in the world at the time. You know, all men that God uses greatly, he prepares them greatly. All right? Preparation a lot of times is through, you know, you talk about, you know, making knives or things. You know, what do they do with that metal, right? You got to melt it. You got to put it through hard times to make it there. So, you know, these bad things that Joseph's going through are just part of that preparation. All right? You know, there are few that are willing to endure that greatness of God's preparation. But as you look through this story, God was in both the steps and the stops in Joseph's life. The steps and the stops. So as we conclude here in chapter 40, we'll pick up again where the butler remembers something. I forget things all the time, so I don't blame this guy. But, we'll pick that up again here in chapter 41 next week, Lord willing. So with that, we'll close in prayer. Lord and Father, we're thankful again tonight for this opportunity to be here with our Christian brethren. We just are thankful for everyone that took the time out to be here tonight, Lord. I just pray that something in this message was a word that they needed to hear, Lord, and that we'll all take this and go out into the world with it, Lord, and just do what we can to serve you. We just pray now, Lord, again for safe traveling mercies and bring us back again at the next appointed hour. We pray that you'll bless the upcoming business meeting. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.